Okay, for the second part of our plane, while we're waiting for this stuff to dry, we're going to start building our wings. And the wings we're not going to glue to the plans. This part right here we're going to use to line up our wing, but we're going to take it off of there and we're going to glue it to the skins later. So don't glue yourself to the paper here. To help prevent that, you can put wax paper or clear cling wrap over this. I find that that tends to bulge up a lot, and if you're just really careful with the glue, you can keep it from sticking to the plans. Although it's bulging up a little bit here, I'm going to put another piece of tape on there to hold that down a little bit better. Again, if you have some objects around to use as weights, I happen to have a box of pencils here and some other things you can use to help hold stuff down, or you can tape stuff down onto here to help hold it in place, but we're going to need to pull it off later. We're going to start with two of our long sticks, one for the leading edge and one for the trailing edge, and we need to trim them down to length. Unfortunately, the plans make it look like the sticks are trimmed off slightly inboard of the ribs, but we really want them to go all the way to the edge of the ribs. If you mess this up, it's not a big deal. It'll make your wing a little tiny bit shorter than it's supposed to be. But we want the stick to go all the way to the end of the wing, under that outer rib. So when I mark this, I'm going to mark it all the way at the farthest edge of the wing and cut it off there. I'm going to do the same with the other stick. And I'm just going to trim those off with my scissors here. Make sure that I still got these the right length. To connect these, we're going to use ribs, and those are going to be punched out of our sheets here. And these are die cut fairly well, so they tend to come out intact. If you have a little trouble getting it out, if you have a knife available, you can use a hobby knife, utility knife, kitchen knife, box cutter. X-Acto knife works best. But if they break when coming out, you can still glue them back together usually. I haven't yet had anyone who's broken one beyond repair. So you're going to have 6 ribs for each sheet. And you're also going to have 2 other pieces. One of them is the wing support. That's this really wide rectangle. I'm going to set that aside because we're not going to need that till later. And this little small guy with an arrow on it. And this is our angle guide for our ribs. So we're going to use this guy also. And it's the same for the other sheet. So the other sheet will pop these out. Now, your sheets of balsa may not be the same density of balsa. On mine, I have one sheet that's much more dense than the other. And if you have that in your set, that's okay, but you don't want to put all the dense ones on one wing and all the light ones on the other wing, because then your plane will have one side heavier than the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix and match these. So I'm going to do 3 of the heavy ones and 3 of the light ones in each wing panel. And we're going to build one wing at a time. We're going to build a left wing and then a right wing. Although a common problem in building planes built up from the ribs and spars is people will accidentally build 2 right wings or accidentally build 2 left wings. To avoid that, we're going to make our wings symmetrical and direction agnostic so that they can be either a left wing or a right wing. So I'm going to take 3 dense ones and 3 non-dense ones and set the other ones aside. And I'm going to kind of space these out. I'm going to put my dense ones at the tips here, so that those are the strongest ones, and then put another one in the middle, and then I'll put my non-dense ones just sort of laid out here. So to glue these together, I need one part to stay put here. So that'll be my leading edge. I'm going to just put a couple pieces of tape here to hold it in place. And you don't want to tape it down too well. It'll be really hard to take off later. And the other one I'm going to leave loose for the moment here because I'm going to want to scoot it in to butt up against the ribs. So the outer ribs here I'm going to start with first. And they have a notch at the leading edge, so I'm going to put a little bit of glue into that notch, and that's where it's going to glue to the leading edge. And I'm also going to put a little bit of glue at the very trailing edge, and I'm starting to get a little too much out here, so I'll wipe that off. And I just did it again, so I just got too much there again. And I'm going to put one edge on one strip, and then take the other strip of wood and just gently push it up against it so that it meets perfectly. And the outer ribs are going to be set at an angle using this dihedral angle guide. And we want the two outer ribs to be tilted inwards. On a car, they call this negative camber, but this is what's going to allow our wings to join together at the right dihedral angle. So we're going to use this angle guide, push this out a little farther there, to get this rib angled towards, so it's making like an A, towards the center of the wing, and that's bouncing up a little bit there, so I'm going to put my propeller on that here. Oh, that's a little light. I'll put a marker on that. I'll hold that down. There we go. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the wing. So either side of the wing could be the center or the tip. It doesn't matter that way. That way, either wing could be a right wing or a left wing. So a little glue in the notch, a little glue on the very back of the rib. And put the notch on the leading edge, and then push the trailing edge in so that it touches, and use my dihedral guide to angle this one towards the other side. So again, both of them are angled towards each other like an A, and this guide gets us approximately the right angle, within a degree or two. And I'm going to put my scissors here to hold this guy down. And now I can put in the other ribs the same way, and the leading and trailing edge should be at about the right spacing now. So I can add all the middle ribs here. And the middle ribs should just sit straight up and down vertical. They don't need to be at any particular angle. This glue works fairly well if you glob it on, but it will take longer to dry the more you put on there. So if you start with a small amount, and then later, if it seems like it's still not very strong, you can always add another dab of glue to it later to strengthen it. Looks like this is still bouncing up just a little bit here, so maybe I'll grab some more colored pencils or markers here just to help hold these down nice and flat. If you look in the instructions, it says to pin them into place. And that's great if you have a building board available. You can make a building board out of a piece of ceiling tile or a cork bulletin board, and then use pins to hold things in place, which is ideal, but very few people have a cork board or a building board around. You can also use cardboard if you wanted to use cardboard to do this, but the cardboard doesn't hold the pins as well. In general, if you haven't practiced using pins, it takes a while to learn how to pin things in place. So just using slightly heavier objects, I find, is a quick way to hold things in place without having to use those pins. So we've got one wing drying. It should not be glued to the paper here. These guys are drying now also. This one doesn't need to be on the building board as it dries. If I want to now, I can start cutting these out after they've set for a little bit. So I'm going to take my scissors off here and replace it with some pencils. And I'm just going to cut my plans in half here. And I'm going to retape this side down. But once my fin and stabilizer have dried long enough, I can cut these out of the paper just by taking the scissors and trimming along the edge. And if you have a little bit of paper left over, it's not a big deal. If you want, you can try to shave it off with a knife. But again, it's not a big deal if you have a little bit of paper sticking out. And you can always go around afterwards and trim it a little bit more. Try not to cut the balsa as you do this. And make sure it's pretty dry, otherwise it's going to start loosening stuff. But when you cut it out, now you have your completed stabilizer. And I'll do the same thing for the fin here. And here's our completed fin. We're going to glue these two together at a right angle, and we can do this while the wing is drying, so that way we're not wasting any time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to put a decent sized bead of glue along the bottom of my fin. and glue that to my stabilizer right down the center line there. And we want to make sure that it's at a right angle, so you're going to want to kind of sight down it there and make sure it's at a right angle. And you're going to need to hold it for a little while it dries, or at least while it sets there. If you're careful how you set it down on the table, you can actually set it down so that it holds itself at the angle you set it at. And you can sight down it, and that way it'll sit there and dry at a nice right angle for you. And just let that sit for a few minutes. And then if you want to, you can add a little bit more glue to the sides to reinforce it. I'm going to go ahead and build another one of these wings here. If you want, you can just repeat this section of video to build the other wing. But just in case we want some extra instruction and anything else comes up, I'm going to pause the video again here, wait for things to dry a little bit, and then start the next wing section.